Hello everyone, after all the feedback and positive comments from the last sculpting video, I've decided to get onto the second part ASAP. Before we jump into that, I did want to say a massive thank you to everyone who has followed me so far. We've jumped from 20 followers to over 620 people in just 4 days. That's just crazy for me. Anyway, this is where we left off in the last video. So I decided this time I want to kind of get in pretty much most of the scales down and make it look more like a lizard. And a model doesn't really start looking like something unless it's gotten eyes. So I'm not quite putting in the eyeballs yet, but I want to make the eyes really kind of stand out. So I'm going to do those first, and I'm just putting the scales around the top and the bottom of the eyes. And looking at my reference model, there's really big spikes that go down the middle of the head. So I'm going to do that. Now, I'm using this mask tool because I've drawn in some scales that I want to make into horns, but I really don't want to affect all the area around it. I just want that horn to be kind of extruded out of the face. So I mask off the stuff that I don't want to change. So now that I've got those, they're kind of rough. I'm going to use the flatten tool to make them kind of look more like hard surfaces. So I just flatten on each side of them and bring them to a point. All right, I've done the middle one. I'm pretty happy with how that looks. So I'm going to draw in the two on the sides and I'm going to mask out the middle because I really don't want to change the middle. I'm pretty happy with how that looks. Now I've got some horns all the way up the top there, so I'm going to try to shape them, and you've got to make sure you look from each direction all the time because you might be dragging in one direction, but it might not actually drag the direction you're thinking it's dragging. So always check every single angle. So I'm just dragging each one of these, remasking, unmasking the stuff I want to change, and pretty much rinse and repeat. And then I'm going over each of these scales with the flatten tool to kind of bring them to a point again to make them look like that hard kind of scale surface. And I kind of go back in and use the crease tool in Nomad, which is fantastic for making details really stand out. It kind of just creases in between two parts of the model to kind of separate them a little bit more and give it a bit more depth. I have to admit, I played around with these horns a little bit longer than I had hoped, and this video actually ended up being 30 minutes that I've cut down to like 5.5. But you can see that as I pulled the horns, they just kind of didn't want to go where I wanted them to, so you have to keep pulling from each different direction, have a look around, pull them in the direction that you want them, and just to kind of reshape them, and always check from every angle that it's what you are wanting, because as soon as you change one thing, the other angle also changes. Just remembering that it's a 3D model is something that's really, really important. So I'm just looking from the side and I can see there's some kind of weird crease that I've made between two of my scales. So I'm masking out the area that I really don't want to change, which is the top of the bottom scale of that area. And just trying to smooth that out a little bit to make it look the way I'm after. It just looks like a little bit of an error in that mesh, and I'm going to go back in and just inflate the edges of this eye just a little bit and redefine those features, because as you remesh, sometimes you do lose a bit of the detail as you go. And I've also noticed it's a little bit thin, so every time I change it, it has a really big impact, especially when I crease it. So yeah, and we can see that I've lost a little bit of detail in the scales at the front, so I've just gone over them again a little bit with the crease tool. And now basically I'm going to fix these nostril ups just a little bit. I'm still not completely sold on the nostrils, but that's okay. They can be changed all the way up to the end, and I'm going to draw in all of these scales. Now with the scales, I am just using the crease tool. So I actually am not changing very many pens or anything like that, or any brushes. I'm just using that crease tool to draw them in. And you can see that ridge that originally was a cylinder in our Tinkercad design. See, I told you it wouldn't look like a cylinder after I'd popped it into Nomad. We've now got a few horns that kind of run down from the eye down to the nostril. All right, I'm going to continue drawing in the scales. Now, they don't look too crash hot yet, but also remember, I'm not designing this to be a resin print. If I was designing it to be a resin print, I'd probably put a much higher detail texture on this face. This 3D model is only going to be used for an FDM printer, so you're not going to get heaps of this detail coming through. especially if you print it as small as I'm probably going to be printing it in an articulated figure. Now I'm going out just using the flatten tool here because I noticed it kind of looked like he just had some bubbles all around his head, and that's not really what I wanted it to look like. So I'm just going around and I'm flattening the tops of some of the scales to make them look a little bit more hard surfacey, because you kind of do get the rounded edges as you use that crease tool. So I'm just going in, kind of touching just little bits of each of the scales with that flatten tool to make them just look a little bit more of a hard surface. And alright, I know that video was kind of a lot of the same type stuff, but that's kind of what's involved when doing 3D modeling. It's going to be time doing things you don't really like doing. I don't really like doing scales. But I think it's turned out really well, and in part 3 I'm going to work on the horns. I also know a few people are really keen for some tutorials on this. I'll see how I go. I'm still really new to it. So let me know what you think in the comments down below, and don't forget to like, follow, all that good stuff, because you won't want to miss what I'm printing or sculpting next.